right. Hello, everybody. So we're entering into the final unit, and big thing we're talking about first is trade. And these images will help. The first image will help you do one of the things that I want you to do to start with today. So it's a good graphic about deals that Canada has made in the last number of years with a number of countries, and how basically free trade agreements or deals that allow for some semblance of free trade. Again, these are all the different ones. Not all the different ones, but different ideas of them. Of course, we know about NAFTA, which is funny about the name here. I don't think that's the total. I know that's not the name, unless what. Oh, okay, never mind. No, I'm reading that a little more. This one here, though, right, was reworked just the last couple of years. So this graphic, well, good, obviously, is not totally up to date, but you can see, we have a whole bunch of different countries, lots of Latin American countries, not Jordan, not Israel, European free trade. We have lots of deals around, and there's other ones that are not listed here. But we are a trading nation. This is just a highlight in terms of a smaller country like Ireland. And what do we send to a place like Ireland? Well, Ireland gets our chemical products is number one, right? But still, food being third, interestingly enough. But you can see that both the two biggest things for us to send there are things that are to do with chemicals and manufacturing goods, right? Ireland is now known a lot for its tech programs and its development that way, especially before they had their little crash. But now, just in general, trade. So interestingly enough, in terms of numbers, which is what, of course, economic theory of trade is based on, the two things you look at are comparative advantage and absolute advantage. Those are both theories put forward by David Ricardo. Not one of the theory that anybody chose to do in the historical thinking, but he had a lot of theories because the guy was a genius. Anyway, those ideas we're going to kind of explore when it comes to trade. Now, usually in Canada, political parties that are right of center tend to want trade, again, traditionally want trade increased and government to be decreased. So when the free trade agreement came into play in the 80s, in the 90s, it was, at first it was the conservatives that were on board and really pushed that, and they, under Brian Mulroney, they really pushed that through to get that agreement signed. At the same time, as it moved on, right, 93 was NAFTA, and that was pushed forward through by the Chrétien liberals, who are centrist, right, but they have business interest. But the interesting thing is, as we move on, free trade agreements and things like that are now pushed more by left-leaning parties rather than right. So if you think of Trump's presidency in the United States, his presidency is marked by protectionism and mercantilism and things that protect domestic industries, and it's also been a hallmark of some of the opposition from the conservatives in this country. And suddenly right of center parties are now defending not trading with different people because they want to protect domestic businesses. But that involves market manipulation and protectionism, which is major market manipulation, which is against what they would usually put forward. Interestingly enough. So we're going to look at, I've got some charts up here. interrupting myself. So yeah, it's interesting now that the left of center ones are more about finding markets to trade with and opening up the doors to trade. But of course, it does come at a cost. So going through what it looks like graphically. So here's an example between U.S. and China. We can see in these cases where it's beneficial to trade, the biggest thing is always the consumption point with trade. It's always exceeding. If it's a beneficial thing, it's going to exceed the production possibility curve. Okay, so that's the main thing, is that by yourself, you may be able to outproduce another country, but together with trade, even if you are better at producing everything in another country, usually you can move your consumption farther than it would have been without trade. Okay, so that's what that one's showing. This one's showing Tom and Jane, and as you can see, if you look inside, right, here's Jane, it's PPC, and here's Tom's. So Tom is better at producing both goods, grapes and nuts, which is hilarious to me because I think that's a reference to a Seinfeld bit. Well, a joke on a Seinfeld bit. Grape nuts, the cereal grape nuts. You open the box, no grapes, no nuts. I don't know. I've never had them, but I remember the joke. Anyway, moving on. So, if you look at, in terms of, it looks like they wouldn't trade because Tom can outproduce Jane in every sense in both of these goods of grapes and nuts. As you can see, there's Tom's production possibilities if he only produced one of each good, right, is better than both of Jane's. Okay, but this would be your so this would be Tom's consumption point that would be the most optimal in terms of being able to if they produced both goods themselves. But so that means that Tom has I don't know, doesn't say it in here. Tom has an absolute advantage in both goods. But if, and there's math behind this stuff, if Jane produces one good and Tom produces only the other good and they trade, right, that's called a comparative advantage, if there's an advantage to be had from one person specializing in the other one. And what it does, as you can see, it moves the production and consumption, not the production, the consumption possibilities higher for both Tom and Jane. All right. Same thing here. Same idea, except for in this case, right, you just have a different look at it in terms of this way there is no absolute advantage. So up here for this one, Tom had an absolute advantage because both goods Tom could produce better than Jane. In this case, he only has a comparative advantage in that he can outproduce her in nuts, but Jane outproduces him in grapes. So if they work together, though, they together would be able to produce more of both and have a higher consumption possibility for both. All right. And again, this is a little more complex look at it, but it's the same idea between Australia and New Zealand. So Australia has an absolute advantage in both. In this case, they've got bales of cotton and bushels of wheat, right? The idea here, again, is just literally that even though Australia could outproduce New Zealand in both cases, although just looking at how this is laid out, where are we? So here being here are the trade possibilities. The fact that New Zealand can be outproduced now this is per 100 acres, and so the efficiency is the absolute production here, and without it, right, no trade at all, this would be the consumption point where the market reaches equilibrium, with some trade, which means they would both produce both goods and then trade a bit, it moves out. And then with absolute specialization, meaning one country produces one only and the other produces the other, and they trade, that moves, their possible consumption rate that much higher. So in the way that, again, we'll go into this a little bit differently, but I just wanted to just showing graphically what it looks like. It's basically the idea of pushing that PPC farther to the right, because you're able to combine your own production possibilities with someone else. Now, this morning, what you're going to do is, there's two things. One is looking up Canada's trade agreements. Now, I don't want you to go crazy here. What I want you to do is pick, say, let's say 3. So pick 3. And you're not going to, I don't want huge details, I just want what is the main advantage of being in that agreement. Okay, so pick 3 of Canada's trade agreements with other countries, obviously, and detail what is the main advantage of being in that agreement. Why did we sign the agreement? Okay, there's lots of trade agreements that we're part of. TPP is one, the one with the European Union, the one with the United States and Mexico, and then the ones with different countries in South America. What is the reason? What's the main advantage we get from being in that agreement? And then the other thing is, what I like to do is take a pic of trade, the evidence of trade in your region. Okay. So what you're going to do is you're going to take a picture of, like it says, evidence of trade in your region. What I want, it's either you take the picture, which would be the best, or you grab a picture off the internet that shows trade in your area, but I want it in your region, and I want you to put a caption on this picture that says either the positive or negatives of trade to your area. Okay, so there could be, something that your area gets that's very beneficial, but it could also show how trade is harmful to your area because a loss of production or something like that. So you're going to post your, what we're going to do is you're going to post that to a discussion thread that I'm going to create. Just post it with the caption, and that's all you do to begin with. So 2 things you're doing, you're not handing in because we're going to work with it, but you're going to pick 3 trade agreements, look at the main advantage of that agreement, and then you're going to take a pic, either take a picture yourself or take one off the internet. Again, taking your own picture gets you out of the house, and it's always nice to see areas that people are from and stuff, but it would be best if you did it your own picture, it'd be nicer. And the idea behind it is to show either the positives or the negatives of trade in your area. That is the goal, and that's going to be, you post that with the caption that says the positive or negative of that of trade in your area. All right.